The air was thick with the smell of grilled steak and GA relic butter shrimp. Crystal chandeliers cast RM light over white tablecloths, so crisp you could see your reflection in the fold of a napkin. Every piece of silverware gleamed like it had been polished by hand that very morning. This was Hyde's, one of the hardest places to get a reservation in the whole city. A meal here cost more than what some people paid for a month's rent. I sat at the window table, a glass of soda water rely touched in front of me, watching my son Alan, his wife Michelle, and their 3 kids, dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread, pointing at the menu like they were choosing between investments. "Dad, you want the lobster bisque? If not, I'll just order it for you anyway," Alan said without looking up. His voice had that thin layer of fake courtesy that was thinner than the dishwater in the back of the kitchen. I shook my head, about to say something, when Michelle leaned over and jabbed him with her elbow. She didn't bother lowering her voice enough that the rest of the table couldn't hear. "Your father's jacket is frayed at the elbows," she hissed. "When the check comes, don't let him reach for it. It'll just EMBA ras us." Alan didn't respond, but he shot me a quick glance. I knew that looked too well. It was the same one I used to get from men in suits walking past me when I was on a construction crew, covered in dust and sweat. I looked down at my old jacket. The cuffs were fuzzy, the collar are a little warped, but it was comfortable. It was the last thing ever bought me, did Dad. Alan Clea read his throat and closed his menu with a deliberate snap. "The reason I asked you to join us today is I wanted to tell you something. We're planning to move to a bigger house next month. Better school district, for the kids' future. Financially speaking," he rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, "we're a little short on the down payment. You spent most of your life at that machine shop, so you must have some retirement savings tucked away, right?" I let out a quiet sigh. I'd heard this speech at least 5 times before. It was always for the kids or for the future, but the money would dissipate into some hole, and I'd never hear about it again. "And Alan," I said, taking a sip of water, "remember that $8,000 I gave you last summer for Sophie's summer camp? The camp never happened." "Where'd that money go?" Michelle's face dropped like a curtain. She set her fork down on her plate with a clatter that turned a few NEARBY heads. "Dad, what are you implying?" she said, her voice climbing. "You think we'd steal from our own child? The camp was canceled. That's all. We put the money aside. It's in savings." In savings. That phrase. I'd been hearing it since their wedding day. I knew Michelle's father, old Tom. He'd worked his whole life at the post office, then handed his savings over to Alan for some investment opportunity that went bust. Now Tom lived on food stamps and disability checks. I had no intention of ending up the same way. Before the silence could stretch too long, a waiter read at our table, eyeing a silver tray with a single bottle of red wine. "Sir, the 1982 Lafite you ordered. Shall I open it now?" I blinked. I hadn't ordered any wine. I even touched beer. But Alan reached out and grabbed the bottle with a quick, practiced motion, waving the waiter off like a fly. "Just leave it here, thanks," he said, his voice suddenly loud and oily. Then he turned to me, and I could see the performance unfolding behind his eyes. "Dad, I'm paying for this meal tonight. A little treat for you. This wine, I bet you've never had anything like it. Go on, try some." He said the way you'd offer a scrap to a dog. I watched him open the bottle, decant it with a dramatic flourish, and pour a crimson stream into a tulip-shaped glass. He slid it over to Michelle first. "Here, honey. This bottle alone costs more than that bag you were looking at last week." Michelle took a sip, and her face smoothed into a smile. That's nice." She held the glass with her pinky sticking out, the way she'd seen on television. I sat there and felt the scene collapse into absurdity. They were dressed in discount brand clothes from the mall, pretending to be high society, and I was their prop, the shabby old man they could trot out to prove they had a HRT outside the window. A homeless man pressed his face against the glass. STA ring at the Christmas decorations. A waiter walked over and tapped on the pane, and the man shuffled away, shoulders hunched. I didn't feel much different from him. The steaks arrived, medium with ASPA ragus and mashed potatoes. The kids' STA root squabbling almost immediately. The youngest knocked over her juice, and the red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a stain. Michelle shrieked. Alan lunged for napkins, and for a moment the whole table was chaos. I cut my steak quietly, ate a piece, and let them sort themselves out. I was already thinking about how to steer the conversation away from the money question. That was when the maitre d' came hurrying toward our table. He was an Italian man in his 50s, with hair combed back, so tight it looked painted on. He was followed by two younger men in black suits, their faces blank and serious. The maitre d' usually smiled at everyone, even the ones who complained about their food. But right now his face was tight, like he'd stepped in something foul. "Sir," he said, leaning close to Alan and lowering his voice, "I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with this table. It apars this reservation was double-booked by our system. The other Pa Rudy is arriving very shortly, so if you wouldn't mind." Alan looked up, his brow creased. "Double-booked? We reserved this table 2 weeks ago. I have the confirmation text on my phone right here. Are you telling me it's invalid?" The maitre d' spread his hands. "I apologize truly, but the system flagged this table as reserved for a different guest. He'll be here any minute." "I don't see who's coming," Alan snapped, and his voice rose so fast it cut through the restaurant's ambient murmur. He threw his napkin down on the table. "I brought my family here. My kids hungry. We're not moving. Get your manager." Heads turned. Michelle tugged at his sleeve, hissing, "Alan, come on. Let's just switch tables. It's not worth the fuss." "No." His neck was red now. He stood up, looming over the table. He was taller than me by a good 6 inches. "We're sitting here, and that's final. Who the hell is this other guest anyway?" "Some VIP, they can wait." One of the men in suits stepped 4-way road. He was young, clean-shaven, with a voice that was soft but ride weight. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to cooperate. This table is reserved by someone who has specific needs. Please don't make this difficult." That word, difficult, lit something in Alan. I saw his jaw clench. Then he turned, grabbed my old cap from the corner of the table, and shoved it into my hands. He leaned down, so his face was inches from mine, and I could see the veins standing out on his forehead. "Dad," he said, and now his voice was a ROA, that silenced the whole dining room. "Did you hear them? This table is for our family. So you get outside. Right now. Go wait by the door. I'll come get you when we're done." The room went dead quiet. Even the kid who'd spilled her juice stopped crying. I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass 3 tables away. Michelle had her hand clamped over her mouth. The woman at the next table, wearing a floor-length mink coat, read at me with wide eyes. I looked up at my son. His face was purple, his lips trembling with adrenaline, his eyes full of rage and shame. He was ashamed of me. My old jacket, my worn cap, my weathered face. I was ruining the perfect upper-class fantasy he'd built around himself. I didn't move. I stayed in my chair. I set my cap on my knee, smoothed the brim with my thumb, and looked at him with the same calm I'd once used to read down a foreman who threatened to dock my pet. "Alan," I said quietly, "you're asking me to leave?" "Yes." He shouted it so loud the chandeliers seemed to shake. "Outside. Stand by the door and wait. When we finish, you can—" He didn't finish. The front door of the restaurant swung open, and a gust of cold air swept through the room. Everyone turned. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped inside, tall and straight-backed, his hair white as bone. Behind him came a young assistant CA writing a leather folio. The man's face was familiar. I'd seen it in the newspaper, on the sides of buses, in the glossy ads for luxury condominiums along the riverfront. Hyde Roadblack, the biggest real estate developer in the city. Alan had tried to get a job at his company once, back before he root his own business. He never even got an interview. Hyde Roadblack walked through the restaurant with long, steady strides. He didn't glance at the maitre d', didn't acknowledge the whispered murmurs from the other tables. He came straight to our table. Then he stopped, looked down at me, and in the stunned silence of 60 people holding their breath, he bent at the waist and extended his hand to "Old John," he said, and his voice ride that same quiet authority I remembered from the first time we'd met, 30 years ago, in a back alley in Detroit. I heard you were here. I had to come say hello. You know, if you hadn't pulled me out of that mess in '88, I wouldn't be standing here today. He paused, glanced at Alan briefly. A flicker of recognition, nothing more. And then his eyes came back to mine. That piece of land you asked me to look into. I've got news for you. It's solid. The restaurant was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. Alan's hand was still suspended in the air where he'd been pointing at the door. His mouth hung open. Michelle's lipstick had SMEA red across her teeth. The color in their faces shifted from confusion to something else, something that crawled up their spines like ivy tightening around a trellis. I stood up slowly. I put my cap back on my head, settled it just right, and picked up my old jacket from the back of the chair. Howe Road, I said to my old friend. Let's talk outside. The air in here's gotten a little thick. I turned towel RD the exit. As I passed Alan, he reached out reflexively, his fingers brushing against the worn fabric of my sleeve. His fingertips were cold, clammy. I felt them graze my ARM, and I kept walking. Dad. His voice cracked. A thin, ragged sound. It hung in the air behind me like smoke that I didn't turn around. Howe RD's assistant fell in a step beside me, his voice efficient and low. Mr. Miller, the CA, is waiting out front. The revolving door pushed me out into the night air. The wind came off the river, damp and cold, CA rying the scent of diesel and wet leaves. I took a long, deep breath, the first clean breath I'd taken all evening. Behind me, through the glass, I heard RD Allen's voice, loud and desperate, rising into a shriek I could rely recognize. Then Michelle's wail, muffled like a scream underwater. I put my hand in my pocket and felt the worn edge of my cap's brim. The 1MA Rhea had stitched back together with thick thread. She used to say to me, back when we'd argue about Alan's tuition, his CA, our payments, his endless need, John, you gotta know when to show your hand. I smiled, just a little, and walked Tawa, RD, the black CA, are idling at the curb. The driver opened the back door. I climbed in, let the leather seat swallow me up, and watched the restaurant shrink in the side mirror. My son was still at the window, pounding on the glass with the flat of his palm. I turned my head away and watched the city lights blur past instead. Tomorrow, I thought, would bring its own conversation. But tonight, the meal was over. Howe RDCA, was a deep blue Rolls-Royce, and the leather seats were so soft, I felt like I was sinking into them. I watched the restaurant shrink in the REA review mirror. Alan still at the revolving door, his ARMS flailing, his mouth moving in words the wind chewed up and scattered. Two waiters had him by the elbows now, holding him back like he was a drunk at a BA fight. The CA pulled smoothly onto the main Beleve RD, and the neon lights of the city began to streak past the windows. Red, green, blue, SMEA ringed together like spilled paint. Howe Road sat across from me in the REA, our compartment, a glass of whiskey already in his hand. He offered me one, but I just held it, letting the chill seep through the crystal into my palm. That old John, Howe Road said, his voice looser now that we were away from the crowd. I've been trying to track you down for 2 years. You don't answer your phone, you moved twice, and you didn't leave a 4-way riding address with anyone. He shook his head, amused. You ever think maybe you're too good at disape ring? Just living quiet, I said. Nothing worth making noise over. Quiet's fine. He leaned 4-way RD, his elbows on his knees. But that piece of riverfront land you asked me to dig up, I pulled the records. It's held by a trust that's been buried under shell companies for decades. Took my lawyers 3 weeks to untangle it. He paused, let the silence stretch, then smiled. The beneficia re is you, John. Your name's right there on the original deed. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down, settled while RM in my chest. That land, I remembered it, sort of 30 RS ago, right after I got out of the Navy, I was working at a machine shop in Detroit. A few of my old buddies from the service pooled some money together and bought a scrap of abandoned land in the river. Nobody thought much of it. We figured maybe someday we'd build a GA rage on it, or sell it for a few thousand to some developer. But people drifted away, moved on, and the whole thing got buried under old paperwork and forgotten addresses. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. How much we talking? I asked how RD held up 5 fingers to 500,000. He laughed a short, BA King sound. Try 50 million. And that's before the new bridge goes in. Once the city breaks ground on that connector road, your parcel is going to double. Maybe triple. I set the whiskey down on the little fold-out table between us. My hands were steady, but my head wasn't. 50 million. I'd spent my whole life on assembly lines and repair benches, twisting bolts and replacing gaskets until my knuckles ached every winter. My retirement pension was $1,200 a month. My rent was $800. The rest went to groceries, electricity, and the occasional new pair of boots. When May got sick, we burned through our savings like they were kindling. We almost lost the house. The last thing she said to me before she let go was, "John, don't you cheap out on yourself. You deserve something nice for once." If she could see me now, knowing I'd been sitting on $50 million RS worth of dirt, she'd probably laugh till she coughed, and then call me a stubborn old mule how a RD's assistant handed me a set of keys and a thick manila folder. "This is a tempora replace," Howe Road said, waving a hand. "My old penthouse on the river. Security's top-notch, fully furnished. Use it as long as you need. My attorney will come by tomorrow to walk through the land transfer paperwork. Also," he paused, and his face turned a little more serious, "there's something else. You remember that night in Detroit when you pulled me out of that alley?" I nodded. I didn't like to think about it. The late 80s in Detroit were rough. The whole city felt like it was burning down around itself. I'd met Howe Road at a veteran support group, back when we were both still trying to figure out how to be civilians again. One night, someone tipped me off that he'd been cornered by a group of guys in a dead-end street. I grabbed a wrench from my truck and went in. I don't know how we got out of that, honestly. Youth and stupidity, mostly while Howe Road said, I wasn't alone in that alley. There was another man with me that night. He got CEP rated, but we both made it out. His name's Frank. Runs a shipping company out on the West Coast now. Big freight operation. He's been looking for you just as long as I have. He smiled again. I told him I'd found you. He said to tell you he still owes you a steak. I didn't say much after that. The CA are pulled up to a high-rise with a glass lobby and a doorman who looked like he'd been, say, revet out of granite. I got out, took the keys, and let myself be led upstairs. The penthouse was all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, everything clean and new. The river glittered below, light dancing on the water like scattered coins. I sat on the couch for a long time, STA ring out at it, not really seeing it. My phone was on the coffee table. It buzzed and lit up, buzzed and lit up. Alan, 23 missed calls, 19 text messages. The first few were just, Dad, where are you? Then, I'm sorry. Then, please call me back. Then, why didn't you tell me? Then, you had no right to keep that from us. The last one, from Michelle's number, was the longest. Dad, Alan was out of line tonight. He's been under a lot of pressure at work. We want to make things right. Where are you staying? Can we come see you tomorrow? The kids miss you already. I turned the phone face down and went to bed. The next morning, a lawyer showed up. A young woman with gold-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that probably cost more than my whole wardrobe. She walked me through the land paperwork calmly and clear, RLY. It was all clean. The only hitch was the original deed, signed 30 RS ago with my full name, John H. Miller, complete with the middle initial H that I'd stopped using after my mother passed. My current ID just said John Miller. Minor detail, she said, clicking her pen. We can fix it with a notarized affidavit by this afternoon. No delay at all. She gathered her papers and then paused at the door. By the way, Mr. Miller, your son, Alan Miller, called our office yesterday. He wanted to know if you were on our client list. We didn't give him anything, but I thought you should know. I nodded. She left. I spent the morning making coffee and watching BA ridges drift down the river. The sun was bright, catching the ripples and turning them into little Shah RDS of gold. I knew Alan would find me. He'd never been patient. By 2 in the afternoon, the doorman called up and said a man named Alan Miller was asking to see me. I told him to let him up. He looked rough. His shirt was untucked, his hair a mess, and he had a patch of stubble on his chin like he'd forgotten to shave for 2 days. The navy blazer he'd worn to dinner was wrinkled in a way that told me he hadn't taken it off all night. He came through the door and stopped in the middle of the living room, looking around at the windows, the marble floors, the expensive art on the walls. Then he looked at me, and his eyes got wet. Dad, he said. His voice was hoa rsy. I came to apologize. Last night, I was out of line. I was an ass. I shouldn't have talked to you like that. He stepped forward, reaching for my hand. I left my hands in my pockets. How'd you find this address? I asked around. Hyde Road Black's front desk wouldn't say anything, so I tried the restaurant. The maitre d' didn't know. Then I went back to your old appartement. He swallowed Harrod. You'd left some papers in the drawer of your desk. There was a trust document with this address on it. I looked at him. He'd gone through my things. My old, shabby appartement, which he'd never visited more than twice a year. He'd gone through my drawers, taken papers that weren't his, and used them to find me. I didn't feel anger exactly, just a kind of tired resignation. What do you want, Alan? I said. Just say it. He flinched. Then he took a breath, and the words came out fast, like he'd been holding them in all night. Dad, do you know what that land is worth now? I stayed up all night looking at the city development plans. Once the bridge goes in, that's the hottest piece of property in the county. You've been sitting on it this whole time, and you never said anything. We're your family. We've been rely scraping by. The kids can't even get into the good private school, and you're just sitting on all that money like it's nothing. Why didn't you tell us the words "we're your family" came out like he was entitled to something? Like I'd stolen from him by not ring information. I remembered him at 6 years old, the time we went fishing and his line got tangled in a submerged branch. I'd waded into the cold water to free it, come out dripping and shivering, and he'd stood on the bank laughing, saying, "Daddy, you're the best." His eyes had been bright then, full of pride. That light had gone out somewhere along the RS. Last night at the restaurant, I'd seen what had taken its place. Alan, I said, keeping my voice level, that land is mine. It was bought with money I.e.a. rented and saved with a group of my own friends. It's not your business what I do with it. His face changed. The plea in his eyes hardened into something sharper. So what? You're just going to keep it all for yourself? You're 70 years old. You can't take it with you. What's the plan? Donate it to the church, give it to that Hyde Road Black, who's just some rich stranger. I'm your son. I'm supposed to inherit this. It's mine by right. By right, I repeated. You got a document that says that. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then the dam broke. His voice rose, cracking at the edges. You want to see papers? Fine. I'll get a lawyer. I'll take this to court. You can't just cut me out, Dad. There's laws about this stuff. You have a duty to your family. I stood up, walked past him, and picked up my jacket from the hook by the door. Alan, I said, you can threaten all you want, but the only duty I have is to myself now. Your mother and I raised you, paid for your school, bailed you out of more trouble than I can count. At some point, the rope runs out. I opened the door. He didn't move. His fists were clenched at his sides, and his face was flushed into RK, blotchy red. Outside in the hallway, I heard the elevator ding. Then I heard Michelle's voice, high and bright, the kind of voice she used when she was trying to sell something to Dad. She stepped out of the elevator, her 3 kids trailing behind her. She was dressed like she was going to brunch Pa Rudy. Dress, heels, perfect makeup. The youngest child clutched a piece of paper in his hand, a crayon drawing of an old man with a big grin and pockets stuffed with coins. Across the top, in wobbly letters, it said, "I love Grandpa." Michelle pushed the boy 4-way road. Go on, sweet RT, give it to your grandpa. He's been so busy lately. I bet he hasn't gotten a hug in days. Then she looked up at me, her smile wide and practiced. Dad, last night was a mess. Alan's been under so much stress, and he's never been good with words. But we're still a family, right? A little misunderstanding doesn't change that. I looked at the drawing. The old man's pockets were filled with circles, coins. Michelle had taught him to draw that. I looked at her face and saw the calculation behind the smile. She'd come prepper red, weaponize the kids, the way she'd done a dozen times before. I bent down slowly, put my hand on the boy's head, and ruffled his hair. That's a nice drawing, buddy, I said. You keep it. Grandpa doesn't need it. I straightened up, stepped around them, and walked to the elevator. The door slid open, and I stepped inside. Just as they were closing, I heard Alan's voice from inside the apartment, a raw shout that echoed down the hallway. Dad! The door shut. The elevator sta route to descend. The numbers blinked down. 19, 18, 17. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. I thought, I don't know if I did the right thing, but I know I did the only thing I could. The lobby was quiet when I stepped out. The doorman nodded to me. I walked across the street to a hot dog cart, bought one with extra mustard and relish, and sat down on a bench in the little park by the river. A homeless man shuffled past, pushing a shopping cart full of bottles and cans. He smiled at me, toothless, friendly. I nodded back and offered him the rest of my hot dog. He took it with a grateful shrug and bit into it. Thanks, old-timer, he said, chewing. Good day for it. I looked up at the sky, blue and vast, with white clouds drifting slow as ships. Yeah, I said, good day for it. But I knew this was just the beginning. Alan wouldn't let go of that land. He'd been like that since he was small. Once he got his teeth into something, he wouldn't let go until he either got it or broke it. Michelle was even worse, because she had her father, old Tom, whispering in her ear about maximizing your interests. They'd come at me again. They'd keep coming. I just had to be ready. Frank was a big silver-haired man with a laugh that rooted in his belly and rolled out like a rail down a hill. We met at an old sailor's down by the docks, the kind of place where the floor was sticky and the jukebox only played songs from before I got out of the service. He poured me an RK beer, took a long pull from his own glass, and set it down with a satisfied thump. John, he said, wiping foam from his mustache, you finally got in touch. Howie Road told me about the land. But more than that, he told me about your boy. That kid of yours. He's not after the property, John. He's after cash to plug the hole in his company. I blinked. What hole? Frank pulled out his phone, scrolled a few screens, and slid it across the table. It was a court record, public and reachable. Alan's name was right there, listed as the defendant in a commercial dispute. The judgment was over $40,000 RS, and it wasn't even the first one. There were 4 other cases filed in the past 3 years RS, all related to his little import-export outfit. He'd never told me a word about any of it. Every time he came to me with his hand out, it was always about the mortgage, the kids' school fees, the repairs. Not once did he mention he was being sued in a bankruptcy. And that's not the best part, Frank said, leaning in. Your daughter-in-law, Michelle, she's got a thing going with her old man, Tom. They set up some kind of investment group, mostly getting retirees. High-yield senior retirement plan, they call it. It's a classic pyramid. They pay the EARLY folks with the new folks' money, and now it's collapsing. People rooting to ask for their cash back. They're desperate, John. That's why they're so hungry for your land. They need a lifeline. I sat there for a long moment, the beer going while RM in my hand. I remembered the way Michelle had pushed that glass of Lafite across the table, the way Alan had shouted at me in the middle of the restaurant. They weren't just being rude. They were drowning, and I was the only piece of driftwood they could see. Frank, I said slowly, I want to do this right. I don't want to just crush them. I want to give them a choice. Frank raised an eyebrow. What kind of choice? I want you to set up a meeting. A third party, an investment firm, a lawyer, something neutral. Someone goes to Alan and offers him a deal. They'll give him a cash infusion, enough to cover his debts, but in exchange, he signs over any future claim he might have on my land. Not ownership, just his expectation to inherit it. He walks away clean, with money in hand, and I get peace. Frank swirled his beer, thinking, he'll figure out it's you behind it. Right? He's not stupid. He might, but he'll also figure out it's the best offer he's going to get. Because if he doesn't take it, and he pushes me to court, I shrugged. Then I'll have to show everyone what kind of business he's really running. His debts, his lawsuits, Michelle's little scheme. That won't end well for him. Frank looked at me for a long time. Then he grinned and slapped the table. You got teeth, old friend. I like it. I'll make the call. 3 days later, I got the recording. Frank's associate had met Alan at a coffee shop in EA's office. The audio was scratchy, but Alan's voice came through clear enough, eager, almost desperate, jumping at every promise. So you're saying, Alan's voice crackled on the recording, if I sign this document, the funds clear are today. The associate, a calm professional voice, replied, the wire transfer will be initiated within an hour of your signature. The rate is below prime. The only condition is your agreement to relinquish any potential inheritance claim to the property in question. There was a pause, a short one. I could almost hear Alan's brain whirring. Then he said, I'll sign. Where do I put my name? He didn't ask any questions. He didn't say, I should talk to my dad about this. He didn't ask why a third PA Rudy firm would be interested in his father's property. He didn't hesitate. He signed. The scratch of the pen was loud on the recording, like a mouse gnawing through drywall. I turned off the phone and sat on my balcony for the rest of the afternoon. The river changed from blue to gray to orange as the sun sank behind the skyline. I thought about Marie. She used to say Alan had a good HRT under all the noise. I wanted to believe that. But good HRTs don't sign away their father's inheritance without a second thought, not even for $30,000 RS. 2 days passed. Then my old phone buzzed. It was the manager of my old APA Mint building, a quiet woman named Rosa. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice strained, your son is here. He's banging on your old door. He looks upset. The neighbors complaining. Do you want me to call security? I thought for a moment. No, just tell him to meet me at the restaurant. Hyde's. Same table, same time. That evening, I walked into Hyde's for the second time. The maitre d' practically bowed when he saw me. He led me to the window table personally, and the tablecloth was a deep gold tonight, with fresh candles and a vase of white roses. I sat down and ordered soda water. Alan showed up 10 minutes late. He looked worse than before. His suit was new, but his tie was crooked, and the bags under his eyes looked like bruises. He didn't sit. He stood over the table, leaning on his palms, his breath coming in short. Fast burst, Dad, he said low and tight. Did you set that up the firm? The offer, the whole thing was that I took a sip of my water. Sit down, Alan. He didn't move. His knuckles were white against the tablecloth. I don't need to sit. I need to know why you do this. Why go through all that? Some fake company, a stranger making me sign papers. Instead of just talking to me like a man, I set the glass down. I looked at him, and I let all the frustration of the past RS settle into my voice, calm and clear. Alan, I tried talking to you. I tried telling you no. I tried setting boundaries. Every single time, you either pretended you didn't hear me or you found a way to make me feel guilty. You went through my drawers. You sent your wife and kids to soften me up. You shouted at me in a crowded restaurant. I leaned four-way road, so I did what I had to do. I offered you a deal. You took it. You signed it. That's the end of it. His face twisted. That wasn't a deal. That was a trick. You tricked me into giving up my inheritance. Your inheritance? I almost laughed. Alan, that land is mine. I bought it before you were born. You have no right to it. But I gave you a chance to get out of your mess without ruining yourself. You took the money, didn't you? He opened his mouth, closed it. He couldn't deny it. The wire transfer had Cleo read 2 days ago to Dad, he said, and his voice cracked. I need more. The debts, they're bigger than what they gave me. I didn't tell you everything. There's more. Michelle's group, it's falling APA-RT faster than we thought. The cops, sniffing around. People, threatening to sue. I'm going to lose everything. Then you should have thought about that before you got involved in a pyramid scheme. His face went white. You know about that? How do you know about that? Frank told me. And Frank knows a lot more than you think. I stood up. Alan, I'm going to say this one last time, and then I'm done. I helped you. I gave you money. I gave you a way out. If you and Michelle want to keep digging yourselves deeper, that's your choice. But you don't get to drag me down with you. I'm not your emergency fund. I'm not your safety net. I'm your father, but even fathers have limits. He stood there, shaking. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been running in the wrong direction for miles. I pulled a few bills from my wallet, enough to cover my drink and a generous tip, and laid them on the table. One more thing, I said, pausing by his shoulder. You tell Michelle to START paying those seniors back. Every cent she can scrape together. Because if the police go looking for her and they find out she's been hiding assets, they won't be lenient. And if she ends up in a cell, your kids are going to have a very hot RD time understanding why. I walked out the same way I'd walked out before. But this time, I didn't hear him shout after me. I heard him sink into a chair, the weight of him collapsing onto the upholstery, and then nothing but the murmur of the restaurant around him outside. The air was fresh and so hell. A taxi idled at the curb. I got in and gave the driver M.A. Ree's old ice cream shop, or rather, the address where it used to be. It was a leather goods store now, but I wanted to see the corner anyway. The taxi pulled away, and I let the city lights blur past. My phone buzzed once. Hyde Road, checking in. Then it buzzed again. Frank, with a thumbs-up emoji. I smiled just a little and tucked the phone back into my pocket. The night was still young, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Things didn't go exactly the way I'd planned. I knew Alan would back off for a while. He always did when he got what he wanted, at least until the next crisis hit. But I didn't expect Michelle to move as fast as she did. It was a Saturday morning. I was at Hyde RD's estate, sitting on a wooden dock with a fishing rod in my hands and a lure of beer beside me. The water was calm, the sky a pale autumn blue, and I was just rooting to feel like maybe I could get used to this kind of life. Slow mornings, good company, no one yelling at me about money. Then my phone rang. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost let go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Mr. Miller. The voice on the other end was a woman's, professional, but with a slight edge of tension. This is Officer Chun from the 3rd Precinct. I'm calling in reference to a financial investigation involving your daughter-in-law, Michelle Miller. We have several elderly complainants who allege they invested funds in a program she was running. During our review of financial records, we noted a transfer of $8,000 RS from your personal account to her husband's business account, which subsequently moved to her personal accounts. Can you tell me about that transfer? I sat up straight. My fishing rod dipped towel RD the water, and IBA Rely noticed. The $8,000 RS. That was the money I'd sent Alan last winter. The one he said was for Sophie's dental surgery. I'd handed it over without a second thought, because that's what you do when your granddaughter needs help. But now it was tangled up in Michelle's mess, and the police were tracing every dollar. That officer, I said, keeping my voice steady, that money was for my granddaughter's medical procedure. It was an investment. I have no connection to Michelle's business activities. Understood, sir. But we need documentation to support that. Receipts from the dental office, testimony from your son and granddaughter, anything that establishes the purpose of the transfer. Without that, we have to treat it as potentially linked to the scheme. I hung up and sat there for a long minute. Hyde Road noticed my face and came over, his boots crunching on the gravel. Bad news, he asked. Michelle's investment group got busted. Cops say re-involved, and they found my money trail. Hyde RD let out a low whistle. That's not good. Is she going to drag you into it? Not if I can help it. But I need to get Alan to produce those dental records. He was the one who took Sophie to the appointment. I never saw the receipt. Hyde RD nodded slowly. You think he'll see what parrot? I didn't answer that. I just reeled in my line and packed up my Hyde. The fishing trip was over. By the time I got back to the city, the situation had escalated. Alan picked up on the second ring, and his voice was a ragged whisper. Dad, he said, Michelle got taken in. The police came this morning. They had a warrant. They took her to the station for questioning. I don't know what to do. The kids saw everything. Sophie was crying. She thought they were taking her mom to jail. I closed my eyes. Alan, listen to me, CA, refully. The first thing you need to do is find that receipt from Sophie's dental surgery. You took her to that place on Maple Street, right? Call them, get a copy of the billing statement. Fax it to the police or bring it in yourself. That $8,000 was a legitimate family expense, and we need to prove it. Okay, he said, his voice shaking. Okay, I'll do that. But there's more. The people in Michelle's group, they're not just asking for their money back anymore. They're threatening to sue. One of them came to the house yesterday. An old man. He was so angry he was crying. He said he put his wife's pension into Michelle's fund, and now he can't pay for her medication. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I knew how that felt. I've been there myself, watching Re's medical bills pile up while I tried to figure out how to stretch a retirement check that was never quite enough. How much money does Michelle? Oh, I asked. I don't know exactly. Maybe 100,000. Maybe more. 100,000. There was no way Alan had that kind of cash. His company was already drowning. Michelle's own savings were probably tied up in the same sinking ship. And I had the money now. The land was about to close, and I'd have more cash than I'd ever dreamed of. But handing it over to them felt like feeding a stray dog that kept coming back to bite you. Alan, I said, I'm going to help you, but it's not going to be a gift. I'll cover the debts that Michelle owes to those seniors. Every cent. But you and Michelle Re going to sign a repayment agreement with me. You'll pay me back over time with interest, and you'll do it honestly. No more schemes, no more shortcuts. If you break that agreement, you lose everything. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Alan said, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, "Thank you, Dad. I don't deserve this." "Probably not," I said. "But your kids do. And those old folks who got swindled, they deserve to get their money back." I got off the phone and called Frank. He connected me with a lawyer who specialized in restitution agreements, and within 2 days, we had a plan. I fronted the money to pay off the victims, $87,000 RS in total, all from my land proceeds. The checks went out to the seniors directly, with a letter explaining that the funds were being returned voluntarily and that further criminal prosecution against Michelle would be pursued only if additional victims came forward. Michelle was released on bail 3 days later. Alan picked her up from the station. I wasn't there, but Frank's contact sent me a photo. She looked like a different person. Her hair was flat, her makeup gone, and she was wearing the same outfit she'd had on when she was taken, a nice wool coat that now looked rumpled and worn. Alan put his arm around her as they walked down the steps, and she leaned in him like she might fall over otherwise. I met them at a diner the next evening. A neutral place, nothing fancy. Alan had asked me to come. He said Michelle wanted to talk. She sat across from me in the booth, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that she wasn't drinking from. She looked smaller than I remembered, somehow. "Let's shy Arpita, Dad," she said, and I noticed she didn't call me Mr. Miller or just talk past me like she usually did. "I want to say thank you, and I want to say I'm sorry." I waited. She seemed to be struggling with the words. "I don't have an excuse," she went on. "I got greedy. Tom, my father, he convinced me it was a good idea. He said we could help people and make money at the same time. I didn't think about what could go wrong. I just kept taking more money, promising more returns, and I didn't want to see the signs that it was falling apart. She looked down at her coffee. "I put people's retirement money into something that wasn't real. That's my fault, not Alan's. He didn't know the details. I kept him out of it." Alan was sitting beside her, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. He probably didn't know everything, but he knew enough. He'd helped her move money around. He'd signed checks. He wasn't innocent, but he was her husband, and he was going to stand beside her. I respected that, even if I didn't like it. "Michelle," I said, "I didn't do this for you. I did it for those old people who trusted you. And I did it so my grandkids wouldn't grow up with a mother in prison. But I'm not going to pretend everything's fine between us. You took advantage of my trust. You used Sophie to get to me. You let Alan scream at me in a restaurant, and you didn't stop him." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Good," I said. "Hating yourself is the first step. The second step is fixing it. You're going to pay me back. Every month, minimum payments, no excuses. And you're going to do something for those people you hurt. You can't give them back the trust they lost, but you can show them you're trying. Volunteer at a senior center. Help out with financial literacy classes. Do something that proves you understand what you did." She nodded, and for the first time, I thought I saw something real in her eyes. Not calculation, not performance, just a tired, heavy acceptance. After that, things route to shift. Not quickly, but steadily. Alan's company landed a small contract that kept it afloat, and he route making his payments on time. Michelle found a part-time job at a nonprofit that did financial counseling for older adults. She wasn't making much, but she was showing up. She brought the kids to visit me on weekends sometimes, and I'd take them to the river to feed the ducks. Sophie drew me a new picture, this time just a happy stick figure with no pockets full of coins. One evening, Alan called and asked if he could come over alone. He sat on my couch, the same spot he'd sat before, and he had a bottle of beer in his hand that he was turning around and around. Not drinking to Dad, he said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About Mom, about you, about everything. I realized something. When I was growing up, I never had to worry about money. Mom made sure of that. I didn't understand what it took. I thought money just read. Then I got older, and I st a root making my own, and I thought I knew everything. But I didn't." He set the bottle down. "I got so caught up in trying to look successful that I forgot to actually be a good person. I treated you like a burden when you were the one who made everything possible for me. I don't know how to fix that, but I want to try." I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run across the RD with his fishing rod, laughing. I saw a lot of M.A.R.E. in the shape of his jaw, the way his hands moved when he talked. "At Alan," I said, "we can't go back. We can only go four-way road. You want to fix things. START by being honest. With yourself, with your kids, with Michelle. And stop trying to keep up with people who don't matter. What matters is that you're here, that you're trying. That's enough for now." He looked at me with wet eyes, and he nodded that we watched an old movie that night, the way we used to when he was a teenager, and we'd stay up late on weekends. I made popcorn the way M.A.R.E. used to make it. Heavy on the butter, a little too salty. He ate it all. When he left, he hugged me at the door, quick and awkward, but it was something. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise. But inside, everything felt still. That I walked to the window and looked out at the river. The lights of the bridge glittered in the distance, and I thought about the land, mine now, finally and truly. I thought about Frank and Hyde Road and the hours I'd spent without letting anyone close. I thought about M.A.R.E., and I hoped she could see how we'd all come out. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in hours, I slept through the whole night. A year passed. Not a fast year, not a slow one. Just a year that moved like the river outside my window. Steady, sometimes rough, but always flowing four-way road. I stayed in Hyde's penthouse for a while, but it never felt like mine. Too much glass, too much marble, too many rooms I didn't need. So I bought a small house on the edge of town, a brick place with a porch and a RD big enough for a GA den. M.A.R.E. would have loved the GA den. I planted tomatoes and peppers and a row of sunflowers along the fence, just because she always said sunflowers made her smile. The land deal closed without any problems. The bridge project went ahead, and the value of the property climbed like I'd been told it would. I didn't sell it all. I kept a piece of it right by the water, and I had a small cabin built there. Nothing fancy, just a place to go when I wanted to hear the waves and watch the BA ridges slide past. Sometimes Frank came up from the coast, and we'd sit on the porch with fishing rods and cold beer, not saying much, just being old friends in a quiet world. The RD called every few weeks to check in. He offered me a seat on one of his writable BOA RDS, and I took it. We funded a program that taught financial literacy to seniors, the kind of thing that might have saved some of those old folks from Michelle's scheme if they'd known better. It felt good to do something useful with the money, something that didn't just sit in a bank account, running interest. Alan's company didn't go under. He worked harder than I'd ever seen him work, and he st a root paying off his debts one by one. He'd come over every other Sunday with the kids, and sometimes Michelle would come too. She was quieter than before, less eager to fill every silence with chatter. She'd help me in the GA den sometimes, pulling weeds or watering the tomatoes, and we'd talk about small things, the weather, the kids' school, recipes she'd tried. We never talked about the money. We didn't need to. One Sunday in late summer, Alan showed up alone. He brought a six-pack of beer and a bag of burgers from the place down the street. We sat on the porch and ate, watching the sun sink tower. The tree leaned to Dad, he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I've got something to tell you. I sold the company." I turned to look at him. "You sold it not for much. Just enough to clear the rest of the debts and put a little aside." The guy who bought it is keeping on most of the staff, so nobody lost their job. But I'm done with that business. I was never good at it, and I was never happy doing it. I just kept going because I didn't know what else to do. He leaned back his chair, STA ring up at the sky. The clouds were pink and orange, streaked like cotton candy. That I got a job offer, he went on. A real one. Down at the Hyde, doing maintenance work. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. The pay is okay, and the benefits are good. I'll be working with my hands again, the way I used to when I was a kid. I think I'll like it. I didn't say anything for a minute. I just looked at him, this man who'd once screamed at me to get out of a restaurant, who'd signed away his inheritance without a second thought, who'd been so lost in his own pride that he couldn't see the ground beneath his feet. He looked different now, softer somehow. The lines on his face had settled into something less tense. I think that's a good move, I said finally. Working with your hands, it keeps you honest. There's no room for shortcuts when you're fixing something that's broken. He nodded. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. We finished our burgers and sat in comfortable silence as the Skyder keened. The first STARS came out, faint and twinkling. Alan stood up to leave, but he paused at the door. Dad, I never thank you properly. For everything. For the money, for the second chance, for not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to pay you back for that. Alan, I said, you already have. You pay me back by showing up, by doing the work, by being a better man than you were before. That's all I ever wanted. He hugged me. A real hug, not the awkward kind. He held on for a moment, then let go and walked down the porch steps to his CAR. I watched him drive away, his taillights dissipate, ring around the bend. That I went inside and poured myself a glass of water. The house was quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet. I walked through the rooms, touching things. The worn armchair where I read the paper every morning, the framed photo of Marie on the mantel, the stack of books I kept meaning to get to. This was my life now. Simple, honest, mine. The next morning, I got a call from Frank. John, you're not going to believe this. That old shipping company I told you about, the one I work for, they're looking for a consultant. Someone to review contracts, make sure the legal stuff is clean. No heavy lifting, just a few hours a week. Interested, I thought about it. A little work, a little purpose. Enough to keep my mind sharp without taking up all my time. Sure, I said. Send me the details. Frank laughed. You're going to be busier in retirement than you were when you had a real job. Good, I said. I like busy. Later that week, I went to visit the senior center where Michelle volunteered. It was a small building with a bright blue door, and inside there were old folks playing cards, reading newspapers, chatting in the sunny common room. Michelle was at a table with 3 elderly women, walking them through a simple budget worksheet. She looked up when I came in, and her face broke into a tentative smile. Dad, she said, you came. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I pulled up a chair and sat down. The women at the table introduced themselves. One of them, a tiny lady with a floral scarf, patted my arm and said, your daughter-in-law is very patient with us. We appreciate it. I nodded. She's got her moments. Michelle flushed, but she kept working. I stayed for an hour, just watching, listening. When the session ended, she walked me to the door. Things are going better, she said. The center wants to hire me RT time once my volunteer hours are redone. It's not much money, but it's honest work. Honest work is the only kind worth doing, I said. I'm proud of you, Michelle. I know I don't say that enough. Her eyes got wet. She blinked quickly and looked away. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. I left the center and walked down the street to the riverfront. The new bridge was almost finished, a massive arch of steel and concrete that stretched across the water like a promise. I stood at the railing and watched the construction crews moving slowly across the deck, tiny figures against the sky. My land was on the other side, the piece I'd kept. The cabin was there now, small and sturdy, waiting for me. That a man walked up beside me, an old guy with a gray beard and a worn cap like mine. He nodded at the bridge. Pretty impressive, isn't it? He said. That it's something. I agreed. Good for the town. More jobs, more business. My grandson's working on that crew. He pointed to a cluster of workers on the FAR end. Young kid, still Leo running. But he's got a good head on his shoulders. Best thing you can do for a kid, I said, is give them room to Leah RN, and a hand up when they need it. He nodded. You got kids, 1 son, and 3 grandkids. Lucky man. Yeah, I said, looking out at the water. I think I am. We stood there for a while longer, 2 old men watching the world go by. Then he tipped his cap and walked away, and I stayed by the railing until the sun st route to Dip Tower, RD, the horizon. The bridge glowed orange in the fading light, and the river ran gold beneath it. I thought about the year that had passed, all the fights and the TRS, the shouting and the silence. I thought about Alan, who'd finally found his way back. Michelle, who'd Leah reneged to be humble. The kids, who still drew pictures for me every Sunday. I thought about Frank and Howe Road, friends I'd almost lost touch with, now back in my life like they'd never left. And I thought about M.A. Ree. She was there in the sunset, in the smell of the river, in the RMTH of the evening air. I didn't believe in heaven the way some people did, but I believed she was watching. I believed she was proud that I turned away from the railing and walked home. My house was waiting, cozy and quiet. I opened the door, and the smell of tomatoes from the GA Rodin drifted in through the window. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my room chair, looking at the photo of M.A. Ree on the mantel, happy. I asked her quietly. The photo didn't answer, but I felt the answer anyway. Yes. Happy. The phone buzzed. A text from Alan. Kids want to come over tomorrow. Can we grill hot dogs? I typed back. You bring the hot dogs. I'll make the potato salad. Then I put the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. That's how it ends, I guess. Not with a bang or a courtroom victory or a dramatic scene. Just a quiet evening, a full belly, and a family that finally Leah reneged how to be a family. And that was better than any amount of money.